Welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I take a look at the 2017 film Bright, starring Will Smith, Joel Edgerton, and Noomi Rapace. It has a 28% on the tomato meter and an 84% on the audience score. There are 19,175 audience reviews as of the time of me recording this episode. And I'll have to agree with the 84% audience score. It deserves it. I originally intended to watch this not knowing anything about the Rotten Tomatoes scores. I managed to keep myself away from this on Rotten Tomatoes, and I watched this giving it a completely open mind on Netflix. And I had a notepad, of course, on my lap with a pen, and I was just ready to write down flaws that I found with the film. However, this film was entertaining enough for me that I got swept up enough in it that I couldn't find any standout flaws to write down. I would have thought that by the final act of the film I would have been, looking at a list of at least 10 to 12 things jotted down on that notepad. And I had nothing jotted down, and I realized that at that point that I pretty much really enjoyed this film. Sure, it had flaws like any other movie. It was directly released to Netflix, but it completely surprised me. I found this very enjoyable, and I wanted to see how it ended. Now, the ending of this film, I'll say the last 10-15 minutes, how it all wrapped up, I think that's the weakest part of this. I think that could have been better. It had a twist ending that didn't quite feel like a twist. It was a little too obvious, and the writer and director, they didn't exactly take full advantage of that little twist at the end. I think they could have done better. They could have, this had a 1 hour and 57 minute runtime. I think they could have put another 10 minutes into this at the end. And they could have done it a little more justice, made it feel more satisfying. I just feel that ending, a lot of the things didn't come together enough at the end for it to feel to me like I would give it, more than just 2.5 to 3 stars. Otherwise, I completely enjoyed this, and I had nothing to write in my notepad until I reached, the very end, and then I didn't have anything specific to write except for that magic wand, the twist ending, when it got into Will Smith's character's hands. They should have taken a little bit more advantage of that. Even if they had to increase the running time by 10 minutes, I think it would have made this film a lot better. So let's get right into the audience reviews. And, this is an episode of Rotten Reviews, so I'm going to read only the 3-star and below reviews so that we can find out why people found flaws with it, because there are certainly going to be flaws. I just found it enjoyable enough that I didn't get any standout flaws, at least not until the very end of the film. But I'm sure other people caught things I didn't, because maybe they just weren't swept up in the narrative like I was. First off, let me just say that this film, right away, 20 minutes in, I felt like this felt a lot like Training Day. And sure enough, when I looked up to see who the director was, it was David Ayer, who is the writer of Training Day, and he also directed Suicide Squad and End of Watch. This very much struck me as some kind of Training Day type vibe to it. It had a whole lot of stuff thrown into it. It's kind of like a what would happen on an alternate Earth in which the mythology of, Lord of the Rings, for example, if that mythology had been an actual historical account of something that had happened many centuries ago, then what would our modern day society be like? And this film did a good job of making me feel like that, without providing too much detail on the backstory, except in very broad strokes, as like what I just described to you. Certainly no background details on that history, but it was enough. It was enough to get me swept up in it and wanting to see the end of the film. But before I get too far out on a tangent, let's get right to the first 3-star review, December 9, 2019, making this about a week ago. Not the best movie. They were too busy building a world that they could make more movies about, that they sort of forgot about the movie they were making. There were so many parts that just felt so unnecessary and could have been cut in favor of making a better story, but I have to praise Joel Edgerton for his fantastic performance. Even under all that heavy makeup, his talent talent shined through. I just adored his character. Yeah, I'll agree with this. First off, I'll agree with the 3 stars, and I will give this 3 stars, and that's because I enjoyed this all the way to the end. A flaw or two or not, I still did, and that for that I'll give this 3 stars. I also think Joel Edgerton did a great job, because without looking up who he was under the prosthetics, I didn't know who he was, and I liked his character, and it was convincing to me. Will Smith is just pretty much Will Smith, and that's what he strikes me as in all his films. It worked in this case, a cop version of Will Smith. He wasn't too over the top. He wasn't too cheesy. There was a little bit of an attempt to, a few one-liners, but it wasn't anything that struck me as odd. It felt right. And so, it worked. Overall, it worked for me, so I'll agree with the 3 stars. And I also will agree with this reviewer that, like I said, the ending could have been better. They should have maybe cut some running time out of the middle and added it to the end and made a better ending. Took more advantage of that twist. That wasn't a complete twist, but took more advantage of that, made it better. So I agree pretty much with this reviewer all the way. I don't think they're, except for the world building, this reviewer is saying they were putting too much world building, like they were trying to set up some kind of franchise. I disagree. I think there wasn't enough world building. That was maybe a flaw, depending on, your personal taste. Me, I thought it was passable. It was enough to keep me going, but there could have been a little bit more detail on how we got from Lord of the Rings mythology to the modern day. Throw in a little bit more in there, but I think, again, this is 3 stars, no doubt about it. 2.5 stars, December 8th, 2019. Okay movie, bringing the fantasy to our time. Although I think they tried a little too much, they still managed to keep it interesting. Yeah, I'll agree. 2.5, 3 stars. 2.5, okay. Kind of agree. Again, it's a matter of personal taste. You could kind of bring it down to 2.5 because the ending could have been better. And, well, speaking of ending, I said I didn't really find flaws until the ending, and I'll just say the CGI, the visual effects, it was at the ending that they dwelled a little bit much on the flames of a particular building, and by dwelling a little bit too much on those flames, you could kind of tell that the flames weren't real. But that's a very small nitpick. It wasn't until one particular scene at the very end of the film, but it is, a flaw, definitely. Well, let's see here. 1 star, November 30th, 2019. I was very disappointed by this movie because I actually liked the idea of using like a fairy tale story in the modern world to do some type of allegory for society and whatever. But the total sum of any real allegories is, oh, all the orcs are black and all the elves are rich. And that's really it, and by halfway through the movie that entire element is literally forgotten. Other than that, the plot was really dumb, and the twist with Will Smith being a bright and just the whole story was so predictable and boring. Okay, well, I'll agree with some of that. None of that brings this down to 1 star. This is still a 3-star movie, and I will agree that the story about the orcs and the elves, yes, this is very much just pulled from our modern society and kind of casting it in a fairy tale way. Definitely, but that's no different than what Star Trek does or did during multiple television shows. That's no different from a lot of other sci-fi that we have even today. We have current sci-fi shows that are doing the same thing in a variation of this. Of course, yes, this is very obvious, but there's enough other stuff in here to make that medicine go down perfectly well, and I still say it's a 3-star film. It's going to be very difficult to put orcs and elves and whatnot from a Tolkien type story into the modern world without having some of this in it, even if it's not the focus. So if it's just that you see allegories between current day racial things going on, well, you're going to have that no matter what, whether it's the focus or whether it just pops up by accident. There's no way around that. So it all depends on how the politics rub you and, how much of a message you like in your sci-fi fantasy. And some people have a higher toleration than others. I'd say I'm in the middle of the road. I have kind of a toleration for it. It doesn't make me go completely crazy when I see the smallest bit of messaging, politics or not, in a movie. Some people, they freak out at the smallest hint of it. Other people, the whole thing could be nothing but a political message and they'll still enjoy it because it's a fantasy setting. I'm right in the middle somewhere. I don't think this film crossed over into bad territory at all. I think it was completely acceptable, and for the average audience member, it was fine, and that's why we see an 84% on the audience score. I completely agree with that audience score. So let's move on to the next page. There's a lot of 4 and 5 star reviews, and I'm not going to read through those because I don't think that's fair. I don't think, I'm calling this rotten reviews, so why should I waste a lot of time on the 4 and 5 stars? If this were a contrarian episode, I would, but this is not a contrarian episode. I agree with the audience score in this case. 3 stars, October 30, 2019. Ignore the critics doing their stompy fits. This is original and quirky and worth watching. Okay? And yeah, I'll agree with that. Ignore the critics, but that's almost on every type of film. You can ignore the critic scores. If I thought the critic scores were worth something, I would be calling this critical tomato reviews or something, because no, all that matters is what the actual audience member thinks. All that matters is what the consumer thinks with any product out there, whether it's children's toys or it's pillowcases. All that matters is what your customer thinks about it, what the public thinks about it. That's all that matters, and that's the way I treat these reviews. Audience score is really the only thing that matters. Half a star, October 7th, 2019. This movie left a bad aftertaste. There was so much I cringed at. Will Smith's lackluster acting, the ham-fist racial commentary, the glossed-over prophecy subplot, the out-of-character dialogue and decisions, etc. I didn't understand Ward's relationship to the nurse character in the beginning or why he hates mythical creatures. I didn't understand why the police force was so corrupt and willing to murder fellow officers like nothing. I didn't understand why the elf girl didn't just speak English. Well, this question, a lot of these questions, this is also probably somebody that would ask the same questions about Training Day. Training Day is certainly one of the greatest cop movies that I've seen in decades. I can watch it again and again. It comes off as completely realistic to me. But you could ask also in the movie Training Day, why were all these cops just willing to ice one of their buddies just to steal the money? Well, it's just a case of human greed, and this is very much like Training Day. If you think it's believable that police officers would, they would murder drug dealers to get, stacks of cash for themselves, but you don't think it's believable that the same police officers in the same area of the country, basically in the same setting, would do the same when they had something like that magic wand to steal, which is pretty much like as powerful as a nuclear weapon in the terms of the setting. Yeah, even if they couldn't use it, they'd love to get their hands on it, to auction it to somebody and not have to work anymore, to be rich. So yeah, please, I think it's completely believable what the cops did. This is the centerpiece of almost dozens and dozens of cop movies over the decades. Corrupt cops. It's a very interesting premise because it hits so hard. It's very effective. We see it in real life. It's completely realistic because every time you might think that cop movies are over-exaggerating police corruption, then along comes a real-life case from Los Angeles or New York or wherever to show you that no, these movies are often underselling how much corruption is out there and just how bad it can get when it gets bad. So no, I find that completely believable. Now, of course, if your taste isn't in the fantasy realm or the sci-fi realm, then of course nothing about this is going to seem right to you, but that's a different topic, right? But as far as like cops willing to do all this crazy stuff to get this wand and etc. with the gang members, oh, it's completely believable. They do this kind of stuff for just 10 grand. You think they won't do it for some priceless artifact like that wand? Oh, please, let's get real. 2.5 stars, October 1, 2019. Music was on point, not really a big fan of the storyline. I thought the music like fit with the settings and what was going on. I can't comment on it. It's not my musical taste, but it worked. It didn't stand out as being good or bad, but it fit. It fit enough to keep me involved, to not pull me out of the story, and that's why I say it's 3 stars. Let's move on. Let's see who doesn't like this. 1.5 stars, September 26, 2019. The craziest thing about this movie is that 84% of the audience liked it. Good idea, terrible delivery. It's not crazy. You just didn't like it. But I assure you it's worth the 84%. Half a star, September 15, 2019. One of the worst movies I had the misfortune to sit through. It's a mess from top to bottom. There's not a single good moment of action, tension, or levity in the film, and it takes the full charisma of Will Smith to stop it from being unwatchable. Well, I'll disagree, first off, with your final sentence there. There's no full charisma of Will Smith in this. Will Smith is just playing himself in the role of a cop. Nothing good or bad. It's completely a fine performance, but it is Will Smith. Now, anytime you go into a movie that the main cover is like it's Will Smith and some kind of fantasy elements, like an elf is on the box, and you know what you're getting, right? So if you pop this in and think you're going to get like an actual, you're going to get Training Day with Will Smith or something, well, I'm sorry, but you knew this going in that Will Smith is in these kind of movies and this is a fantasy. You knew that. So, I'm seeing this review and it's like the person like queued this up on Netflix and thought he was going to get an action crime drama set in, some gritty, realistic setting. If you think that's what you were going to get, then you're obviously blind because you're the one that clicked on it. So I disagree with everything you said in that review, basically. You see a whole page of 5 stars. Now, I don't think it's fair to just read the 5 stars. I can see why people really were into this, but this is Rotten Reviews, so I'm just going to stick with people that don't agree. 2 stars, July 21st, 2019. Interesting in the beginning, but then became ridiculous. Will Smith played himself in this movie. Yes, Will Smith always plays himself in every movie. I'm going to keep making that point until I find a movie in which that's not the case. I'll talk about it for sure, because in my opinion, 90% of Will Smith's career, he plays himself. But he's made a lot of money and success doing that, so hey, there's nothing wrong with that. If I could play myself in a movie, or in a lot of movies or a TV show, and I got paid to do it, I would certainly do it, despite what the critics told me about playing myself. So I think it's just fine. He plays himself as long as the movie's entertaining. Now, I'll agree with this. As we got towards the end, they threw a lot of stuff. The pacing picked up a little too much. Again, the last 10 minutes or so are where I think most of the flaws are, and it rushed into it. It's like the pace just sped up all the way to the end, and it was nice, and it got a little quicker, and it got a little quicker, and then as we got into the last like 20 minutes or so, the pace just boosted up to maximum, and a lot of stuff happened very quickly. Not too quickly to be believable or to focus on, but a lot of different things in the story came together in a very rushed manner, and again, we're at 2 hours, so you would have had to increase the running time or cut something from somewhere else. But yeah, it felt a little rushed at the end. Let's see, what do we have? 2.5 star, July 2nd, 2019. It fails to make any sense as the timeline is entirely the same as our world, except magical beings have always existed, meaning nothing should be similar. Also, the jokes would make sense coming from a young, loose cannon Will Smith from Men in Black, but just clunky coming from the grizzled older Smith that is clearly depicted as old and weary. Will is good as old and weary. It is solid as a street crime drama, but fails as a fantasy film as a whole. Ayer does a decent job of keeping a concept together. Well, the problem is, yes, it portrays Will Smith as like he's not too many years. I think it says he's 3 years from retirement. It's not like he's going to retire next week, so it's not completely cliched, but it is shown that he's been on the force a long time and he's entering his retirement period. But see, the thing is, it's also shown that nobody wants to be with Will Smith, and it doesn't go into a lot of that why. For example, when Will Smith, he approaches his commanding officer and doesn't want to have the orc character assigned to him anymore. Well, nobody does, right? But the commanding officer tells him, well, the only problem with that really is that nobody else wants to ride with you. So the film, it doesn't explain why that is, but nobody else on the police force really likes Will Smith. So it's kind of portrayed that Will Smith, yes, he's an older, experienced cop who's getting close to retirement, but he's definitely an unpopular cop. He's definitely not. It's shown that he has these conflicts with the other cops. They don't consider him their friend. Maybe the movie failed to like exactly give us more detail and reason for that, but definitely the reason he was paired up with the orc character was because he was the low man socially in the police outfit. He was like almost the black sheep. Yeah, the movie could have gone better into why he was, and it really didn't. There was nothing in the movie that told me why Will Smith was this kind of unliked character in the police precinct. But he was. They definitely showed you that he was, no question about that. Um, that would be him being weird, right? I mean, he's not like a stereotypical cop. There's definitely something off about him because he's not liked, right? Half a star, May 24th, 2019. I thought After Earth was bad, but no, this is worse. I was reminded of Alien Nation 1988, which is an excellent film. I suggest you watch that instead. Similar concept, but actually better directed with a better script. I don't know about that because I remember Alien Nation when it came out. I was in high school. I remember kind of liking it, but it had a lot of flaws too. It had James Caan, and he was the actual Will Smith type cop, but better liked. And then he was kind of stuck with an alien that was similar to the orc character. Um, that movie didn't dwell on trying to make it a parody or a metaphor for race relations in the U.S. It really didn't do that. It felt a little bit boring to me as a standalone kind of sci-fi film. I wouldn't say it's a bad film, but even in 1988, I thought it was just okay. So I actually enjoyed this film more. This was more of an action adventure fantasy film. Alien Nation's a little bit, it's kind of like this film, but make it more like District 9, a little bit depressing, and depressing aliens show up and they're kind of like refugees kind of thing, just like District 9. That's what Alien Nation more reminds me of. It belongs more with District 9, not this. This is more like a Tolkien type of thing mixed with Training Day. So I disagree on the Alien Nation reference. Alien Nation wasn't all that. Um, wow, a lot of 5-star reviews. Moving on. Oh, we have a half a star, April 28, 2019. I have seen better written by my nephew. Maybe. Depends on what you've seen. It could be. But half a star, no way. No way, no how. You're going to have to convince me a little harder than that. 3 stars, April 3rd. Average, but at least you get some magic at times. Well, I say 3 stars. And average, well, it depends on what you're comparing it to. If you're comparing it to Training Day, this one falls down. It's not even 3 stars. If you compare it to a lot of fantasy out there, especially fantasy trying to bring any of it into the modern world, then this one's more than 3 stars. Everything out there that tries to do something like this is completely stupid and straight to the Sci-Fi Channel. Forget about straight to Netflix. It's straight to the, bad late at night Sci-Fi Channel time block. So this is definitely above average for doing this type of thing, for bringing that fantasy into our world. It's definitely above average in that regard. But it isn't a Training Day. It has that thing going on, but yeah, Training Day blows this away in that category. 3 stars, February 27, 2019. So many war scenes. Well, there's a lot of shooting. There's a lot of just straight up machine guns firing. It might be a little over the top, but it didn't feel that way to me. I was along for the ride the whole way. If I felt that it was too much or that it was goofy or corny, I would speak up. I have on many other Rotten reviews, and no, it wasn't. It was completely entertaining. I kept watching it. 2 stars, February 24th. Didn't like it, kind of boring. Cool idea, though. No, it wasn't boring. It wasn't boring at all. I don't know what film you were watching. There was more than enough action in this. 2.5 stars, February 19th. The action seemed somewhat lacked the intended effect, and the film seemed unnecessarily profane throughout. The storyline is lacking, nigh on non-existent, which makes what is a very simple and generic movie extremely confusing. There is a degree of tension throughout, but to be brutally honest, I would not spend valuable time watching this. Well, you gave it 2.5 stars. So that's just about 3 stars. So where do we disagree? You're saying that it was too profane. I disagree. You know, there's a lot of cops involved in this. I'm surprised it wasn't more profane. Think about the way they talk when you know, they're not being watched by do-gooders. So I disagree on that. You're dealing with gang members. I'm surprised they weren't more profane. They were actually quite well behaved for gang members. Believe me. There is a degree of tension. Yeah, there was enough to keep me watching throughout the whole movie. I didn't know exactly how it was going to end. I kind of expected that twist a little bit, but I wasn't sure. So I wouldn't call this completely predictable. No, this is worth watching one time. I will say one thing on another flaw. Um, the movie, like, it does have a little bit of too much magic that isn't quite explained. For example, when Will Smith's character and his partner they go to this building, which features at a couple of points in the movie where these elves are like holed up in an apartment of some type. Well, one of the elves is kind of restrained by magic, and it doesn't explain a lot of that. Like, you can tell visually what's going on, but for somebody that's into sci-fi fantasy, you want a little more explanation about what's going on there. And it tried to do it all in a visual way so that with our knowledge, with the audience's knowledge of other fantasy films and sci-fi, they could kind of figure it out on their own. But it needed just a little bit more detail. You know, there should have been a little bit more setup to the magic. Like the magic wand, for example, had a very cool dripping magic type effect. I really liked that. It was something I haven't seen a lot of. Certainly, it looked better than the wands in Harry Potter, but they didn't do any explanation or setup on, you know, where the wands come from, what fuels them, etc. That's just kind of left up to the audience to imagine, which wasn't bad. It still worked for me, but they could have done a little bit more. That would have increased the tension a little, I think, for people that say there's not enough tension. Needed a little bit more detail on how the magic and stuff works. We didn't get that. But again, I still say 3 stars. It worked without all that, which is amazing because a lot of movies don't, and they go straight to C minus movies when they don't give us enough detail. This one somehow pulled it off for me. February 13th, 2019, half a star. This was bad. Completely asinine storylines, dreadful acting, crappy visuals, sloppy camera work, you name it. Wondering why Will Smith signed up for this, but definitely wrong career move. Same goes even more from Noomi Rapace, who obviously can act and I guess had a weekend appointment canceled and did this movie instead. I don't get the audience score. Saw this flick on Netflix, money well saved in the cinema. And yes, Ayers is about to make a sequel. You know, I think he should make a sequel, but I think only if he gives us more explanation about what the hell, how we ended up in this type of environment, and a little bit more detail on how this magic and whatnot works. If he doesn't do that in the next film, then I'll probably be looking at a rotten film, or I'll say that it is rotten, no matter what the audience score says, because you can get away with this thing once, but if you're going to take us back to this setting again in another movie, you better provide some more. And this is just like a TV show. You can have a pilot that leaves a lot of things open-ended, but you better spend the next few episodes filling in the details, because if you don't, it's going straight into the dumpster. And I think that's the same thing in this movie. You can get away with giving us what you gave us the first time, but if you want the second movie to get an 84% or better on the audience score, you better fill in a lot of this a little bit better. That's just my warning to anybody making a sequel, no matter who it is. And let's continue on. January 19, 2019, half a star. How this direct can get 84% positive is beyond me. Okay, but a little more detail would be good on why you think that. 3 stars, January 3rd. I went into this movie fully expecting it to be absolutely terrible, but it's surprisingly okay. The premise is pretty dumb and it feels far too underutilized for it to not continue being dumb throughout the movie, but they do make it kind of work. My main gripes would be with the patchy dialogue and really unsubtle remarks that to me seem to be trying to make a point about race and class within our own world. Oh, definitely it was. But they don't really apply because they actually are different races. They even seem to have different, well, they may or may not apply. See, that's the thing. You need a little bit more detail on how we got from the Tolkien era to our current time in this film. And that would be the make or break for me on how well it applied or didn't apply. Because remember, we're not in our world with you're treating this and this reviewer is treating this like a lot of people I think that have negative vibes about this movie. They're treating it like you took the modern world and then just somehow orcs and orcs and elves and etc. and fairies just show up and the world like works with them in it. That's not the case here. They've been in this world for a long time, centuries, who knows how many. So in this first movie, we can say, okay, maybe it would be like what it's portrayed. But without some more of the detail, we can't really say it's rotten and say, okay, it just doesn't make sense. It made sense enough to make the story work. Now, like I said, if the second movie fails to provide the detail, and tries to do the same thing and leave everything vague, it's going to be a complete dumpster fire. But for an opening film, you can do this one time, okay? But as far as like it being an allegory for current race relations and whatnot, not really. I mean, you can kind of draw that, and yes, you can say the writer of this was trying to give you that impression, yes. But how to me, this isn't like a positive or a negative thing until I get more detail on, what the differences are, not just the surface level, but the differences in the world in this alternate reality in ours. How did we get from Tolkien era to the modern world? Now, if that's set up really nice, then they can go ahead and put that messaging in there. I won't have any problem with it. If that's set up really shitty or we don't get those answers, then this is going to be really rotten the second time around. And I'm just reiterating that so that that's on record for when the next one comes, if it does. I'm not sure if there is another one, but we'll see. 3 stars, January 1st, 2019. It's an enjoyable sci-fi movie with a good cast. Will Smith is great in his role. It's not exactly sci-fi. I think I've used that word too. It's fantasy because until we get more detail on how this stuff works, if the next movie says that those wands actually have some technological aspect to them, okay. If we start talking about midi-chlorians and whatnot, okay, then we're moving into sci-fi. But for now, this is complete straight-up fantasy, just elements taken from a Tolkien-like story. So it's not sci-fi. 2 stars, January 1st. Started off okay, then took a steady dive downhill. Not a good way to build a Netflix originals brand. Well, I'm not sure that's what this is. I got the impression that this was supposed to be a regular release, a Hollywood theatrical release, and then at some point they didn't have the money to fix the end or to fix issues with it, so they decided it would work better on Netflix. But that doesn't come across to me as trying to start a franchise or anything. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. We've got more 4 and 5 stars. Half a star, December 26th. I tried to watch this the other day on Netflix. Tried. What a piece of garbage this is. It's like the Scientologist made another movie type bad. No way to get through it. It's so dumb. Well, it's interesting you bring up Scientologists because I think Will Smith is a Scientology member. I'm about 99% sure on that. But there's nothing of that in this film. This is straight up elements taken out of like a Lord of the Rings type story. If you're connecting something about Scientology in here, you need to provide the details. I'm willing to listen. You can make your case, but I didn't see it in that small paragraph you wrote, so I'll have to disagree. Again, if there are elements and I'm not seeing them because I'm not, well versed in Scientology, then go ahead and tell me in the reviews, and I'll be happy to delve into it, but I didn't see one hint of that. 5 stars, 4 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars, 4 stars, etc. Okay, we're moving right along. Let's see, can we find, yes, 1 2-star review from December 8th. Bright is a hot mess, but I can see the good concept of it. It was just a bad execution. Character development outside of the 2 leads is non-existent. The way the plot unfolds is cliched and boring. The pacing is awful and makes the film feel way longer than it is. The performances across the board are flat and one-dimensional. Will Smith comes across as a parody of his performance in Bad Boys. Joel Edgerton sounds like he is chewing food all the time and is so wooden. Yeah, it's funny. This reviewer's like taking the complete opposite tack of other reviews that I've seen. I'll just have to say I disagree with all of it pretty much. You could say the plot was a little cliched because it was very much like Training Day. That was a big aspect of it. Again, the director of this is the writer of Training Day, so that definitely has something to do with it. Cliched, not really, unless you count every type of cop drama that has corrupt cops in it as cliched. Not really. I would say it's cliched if it wasn't real world applicable, and it certainly is. I mean, hey, I'm not anti-cop, but every day you can find stories of police corruption. I mean, you look through the news outlets, you will find them. It's just a question of what degree we find them in. But yes, believe me, it's not cliched. Half a star. That a lot of real people, not critics, like this is not surprising. To many, it probably seems like an awesome blend of buddy cop and fantasy in the present day that appears original and unique. I know I'm tainted from having played the role-playing game Shadowrun that this seems to shamelessly borrow heavily from, and that is where I found the film itself to be dross. It could have been so much more. Race/culture development is non-existent and the characters are awfully two-dimensional. Yeah, but it only had a 2-hour running time, so what, you want a 3-hour running time to give you more on, the politics between the elves and the orcs and the humans? Yeah, I don't see how it could do it without really becoming overly long or turning it into a TV show. If it's going to become a TV show, then you better get all those answers. I agree. And if there's going to be a sequel, you better get all those answers. But this guy's giving it a one half. If it is a guy, he's giving it 1/2 a star review. But then at the same time, they're saying that they're not surprised everybody likes it. That's kind of, you got to make up your mind in that one, right? Let's see. Aren't any more 1 stars on this page, certainly. I'm going to have to call this one because I don't know what else to say. I've made my point that, if there's a sequel to this or more, a TV show coming out after this, it better supply the answers to make this all work. But in this case, standalone film, it supplied enough to keep you moving along, to keep it interesting. I enjoyed it. I wasn't looking at my watch. I didn't find it overly long. I just found that the ending felt a little bit rushed. Pacing, the pace kept increasing. And the twist, I mean, it wasn't taken advantage of enough. But otherwise, I completely enjoyed this. I recommend watching it one time. And watching it 2 or 3 times, no, don't do that. But one time, certainly, this is surprisingly good for something straight to Netflix. And I will see you again on another episode of Rotten Reviews.